Welcome to the Feisworld podcast, engaging conversations that cross the boundaries between business, art, and the digital world.
Hi everyone, this is part 2 of my conversation with Stephen Shapiro in episode number 5 of the Feisworld podcast. If you haven't listened to part 1 in episode 4, I encourage you to do so. But if you happen to feel like a rebel today, by all means, keep listening. I'm thrilled to have Stephen on my podcast. Today, he talks about tips and tactics on engaging audience from different backgrounds and interests. Why visceral reaction is the key engaging audience of any kind. Contrary to popular belief, visceral reaction do not happen in intellectual conversations. Stephen breaks the statement down further to logos, ethos, and pathos. I also asked Stephen, how many of the questions today overlap with those from editors and reporters? And by the way, what do you wish people would ask you? Stephen will fill you in on his next and upcoming book on the topic of performance paradox. Then on a related subject, how do you get out of your own way? So tune in, join me in this amazing journey with my heroes. This is about to become my favorite topic now. The fact that we create solutions, we create the whole story around, we curate stories around ourselves to prove what we know.
Yes.
And stay as far as we can from what we don't know.
Yes.
And, I just had this I feel like a storm in my mind just now that even following my own career path is because I believe certain things, certain attributes of myself, either make myself look good, because this is something I've been doing for so long. I feel like 70 years is a long time, and I talk to people who are more experienced, like, come on, you're just a baby. And podcasts in particular, this has been an area I feel like maybe I'm so new. I shouldn't be doing this. So what if I turn around and just kind of say, I'm going to start a project. I have no idea where it's going to go. And very likely I have no listeners and I will fail. But what if I give it a shot and kind of disapprove, but potentially to prove myself in certain areas I didn't know even exist. And one thing that in terms of speaking and just interviewing you, how easy it is to set up the conversation and what I've witnessed so far and how you kind of can so easily navigate around the conversation and to really address certain issues head on and totally not staying at the surface level. I was wondering if you could give some tips on speaking in general. And I picked up this book from Barnes & Noble, and it's called It's Not About What You Say, It's What People Hear. And I was like, oh, that's really insightful, but that's an area I struggle with, and I tend to think of myself as a pretty straightforward blunt person. And sometimes in a meeting, as you know, or having a conversation, I just want to try to get to the point. I don't want to dance around it. Yeah. But people can really turn on you, and all of us have 7-8 meetings, more meetings than the time we have to do work. What are some of, your advice on speaking to a large crowd, or possibly to 7-8 people with senior executives? We talk about emotional engagement, but are there any specific words that you tend to use, or what are the cues, the visual cues, or physical, body changes that you witness too?
So if I were to write a book, it'd be, it's not what you say, it's what they feel. Because what they hear is one thing, but hearing doesn't mean that it actually gets into the brain and gets processed properly in a way that they're going to experience it viscerally. Mm-hmm. And so I'm looking for visceral reactions to people. And visceral reactions do not happen through intellectual conversation. Mm-hmm. Aristotle said ethos, pathos, logos, which is credibility, empathy, logic. And if we think about how we tend to speak, we tend to talk about that last part, that logos, that logic. Mm-hmm. And we will tell you the answer. And but until I feel an emotional connection to the topic at hand, mm-hmm. it's not going to be processed by the brain. So the ethos, again, is that credibility, which is, as a speaker, mm-hmm. we always have somebody introduce us. I don't introduce myself. Mm-hmm. Because there's more credibility when a person who has respect from the audience, the CEO of a company, introduces me. Well, if the CEO likes me and introduces me, that by transference means that the audience gives me some level of credibility. So they read the introduction. That's the ethos. But then I move into pathos, which is I want to build an emotional connection with people. I don't give them the answers. I give them either stories that they can relate to. And these are stories of companies that have maybe done the same thing that they've done and had a sense of frustration. So it's not happy stories. They're actually, a lot of times we'll connect over the frustrations that we have. So I make sure that we talk about the pain. I want to be the aspirin for someone's pain. And I first need to be able to say to people, hey, I understand your pain. I understand how you feel. And once I do that, which is the pathos, that empathy, then I can move into the logic. Hey, here's the picture that I painted. So if I give a speech, for example, when I talk about don't think outside the box, find a better box. I don't start off and say, the next piece we're going to talk about is how we ask better questions. Don't think outside the box, find a better box. Here's 5 examples. What I do instead is when we get into the section, I say, think back to April 20th, 2010. On that day, the Deepwater Horizon oil rig exploded. And I just sort of tell the story. They can relate to it. And I say, we got 123,000 suggestions. How many of those do you think? And again, I can even ask questions which are rhetorical. That I don't expect them to answer verbally, but I want them to answer it mentally. So of the 123,000 questions, how many do you think were deemed as having any value at all whatsoever? And I pause. Even if nobody says anything, which usually somebody does, but even if nobody says anything, they've in their mind formulated an answer, which means they're now not just listening to me, but they're actually participating with me. And so, sometimes we can do even very simple things to engage the audience that way. Pause, ask them a question. Or when I tell a certain story, and it's amazing because I used to tell it one way and then I added one sentence which totally changed the reaction that people had. In the middle of the story, which was about me and someone else, won't bore people with the details of the story. If I continue the story with just me and that other person, it's like watching a movie. And then we get to this point, and there's a very awkward point in the conversation that I have with this other person, where I ask them to do something which would be uncomfortable. And instead of just telling the story, I stop and I look at the audience and say, so what would you do if you were in that situation? What would you do if you were Don? What would be going through your head? Now again, they're not just listening. They're on the stage. They're now actually in that other person's shoes, experiencing what that other person was experiencing. Totally different. So I guess my point on all of this is coming back to what I said in the beginning is it's not what they hear, it's what they feel. And you want them to feel things at a deep, visceral level. This is not intellectual. And we need to break through the cold, cognitive, logical aspect of the brain. Recognize that some people, you have to give them at some point, especially if they're very analytical, you have to give them the facts and the data. Otherwise, they're going to be like, this is too fluffy, I'm out of here. So you need to recognize that an audience is made up of people with different backgrounds, different styles, different interests, and you have to cater to all of them, just like marketing has to cater to everyone. Every presentation, unless you know that every person in the company is 100% fact-driven, in that situation, okay, you can craft a presentation that still has some emotion but gets to the facts pretty quickly. If it's a broad group, you don't want to lose anybody, so you have to time it just right. So, but I think it's that emotional connection, no matter what style you are, is very important.
And I think that not only that's relevant to an audience of 3,000, but even for me, every meeting for many of the people I know, speak to 6-7 people, the designers, the user experience people, the developer, everybody is driven on something else and come from a very different background, upbringing. Maybe perhaps the designer wants to focus on something that's pixel perfect, but the developer is thinking that's less important, the functionalities, and UX, completely different domain. So in order to relate to people, how do you quickly identify, or could you identify, or should you care where they come from, and to sort of steer your conversation? And I know that I'm kind of drilling in really deep right now. It's a, personally, it's something I always struggle with, and I try to relate to people, have conversations with them, not just at meetings. Understand, why are they here? What are they trying to achieve career-wise at this company? Not just my project. Do you think that's something do you think that helps, or do you think I'm missing something that's more fundamental?
Well, I think that helps. I mean, if I have an audience of 3,000, I'm not going to know all 3,000 people. It's just not possible. I will say that I can understand the mindset of the industry, because especially if it's for a company, companies have cultures. And you can sort of pick the culture. Even within companies, there are subcultures. The manufacturing and engineering, and those people are going to have one culture, which might be different than the marketing and the sales and the creatives. And so if I'm giving a speech to an engineering company, to their sales and marketing department, it will be a different speech than if I'm giving a speech to the same company to their product development people. Because scientists want to hear different types of problems solved, and they want to hear information in different ways. So I may not be able to know all people in the audience, but I can hypothesize, who's going to be in the audience. And that's what, we do before every speech is we'll talk to some people. We'll get a sense of, talk to a half dozen different executives to say, well, what are the types of issues that you're facing? What is it like? And so I know before I get in there what kinds of responses I will get to what kinds of information. And I think that's important, because if I go in there and I just start doing something which is totally off the wall and wacky, and it's a bunch of quote unquote left-brainers who just want logic, they're going to be very uncomfortable. So I need to connect with them. If it's a diverse group, like I do these events where you just have no idea, because there's 2,000 people from 500 different companies. In that case, I just put on what I think is the best show I could possibly put on, and cover information I think will be of value to engineers and to chemists and to marketing and to technology and to whatever. And that's all you can do. Yeah,
I'm very satisfied with my question, very much so. And jumping onto the next topic, feel a little ADD here, but everything is all connected. Is you've been interviewed, you've spoken at all these different venues, you've been on the Success magazine recently, and also 2 years ago. People have approached you for a set of questions. I can imagine reporters, editors, whatnot, will show up. So, and I was wondering how much, just personally, how many of those questions kind of overlap with what we just talked about? That's part one. And part two is really, what are some of the questions that you wish people would ask you that do not overlap? I've been answering these 13 questions for 10 years now.
Yeah. Interesting. So I would say the overlap with what we've talked about today is actually relatively low, but the reason is most of the time I'm being asked as an innovation expert. So I'm not being asked questions as an entrepreneur or sometimes as a speaker. So if I'm talking to somebody about the speaking profession, there might be more overlap there. But most of the time when I'm interviewed and I have conversations, it's almost always in one form or another about my innovation background. So we didn't really talk that much about it. So these are different questions. Now the questions I wish people would ask, hard to say. Maybe I'll reframe it and say, not the questions I wish people ask, but what do I think might be some of the most valuable questions for people, which is different than what I want necessarily people to ask, because sometimes the most valuable questions are the ones that are really uncomfortable.
Indeed.
So I would say, and I'm not sure it's a question, but one of the things which I find really fascinating, this is sort of just being very transparent here, is that people look at me and I've got books, and I've got I'm on magazines. I was just on USA Network on a TV show last week, and blah blah blah. And so people look at that and say, "Wow, you're successful, and you're blah and all." And so the outside world sees me in many cases differently than I see myself. Mm-hmm. And one of the things which I'm always fascinated by, and I've suffered from this from the beginning of time, I've gotten a lot better as time goes on, but I think it's something which people, it would be valuable for people to know, is that there's something called the imposter syndrome. And the imposter syndrome is basically where, from my perspective, where the outside world, there's a disconnect between how the outside world sees you and how you see yourself. And I think that's actually very common, but we don't want to admit it. Because when I actually told a group of fellow speakers, some who are like at the upper echelon of their career, and I said, this is, what I've been struggling with. This was several years ago. And I mean, people were in tears because they're like, oh my God, I have it too. And you're like, what? And so I think what people need to understand is that our inside dialogues can be. I mean, so you have people who are delusional, and you have people who are realistic, and then you have people who are, I think the majority of people just, don't have as good of a valuation of themselves as others see them. And I actually saw this, quick tangent, when I was at Accenture. We put a bunch of our executives through Stephen Covey's Principle-Centered Leadership. And part of that is to do a 360-degree-ish sort of feedback. You evaluate yourself on a bunch of different parameters. You have your peers rate you, and then you have your bosses rate you. And across literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people, the data is irrefutable. You will always evaluate yourself the lowest, your peers will evaluate you the next, and your boss will always evaluate you the best. And that's just sort of an interesting dichotomy that I don't know if it's valuable, but for me it's been very valuable, because when you have it and you hold on to it and it becomes a big deal, you're always waiting for somebody to figure out that you're a fraud, or that you're making this up, or that it's not real, or somebody else is better, or whatever it is. And when you just sort of say, that, when you can just sort of let go of that, and just recognize it's just a natural human belief that we have, it takes so much pressure off, and then you actually perform better. So which comes to the next question, which is where my next book is on, which is called The Performance Paradox. And the Performance Paradox is basically what I've found is that paradoxically, the harder we work, the less likely we are to get the results we want. It's not to say we don't want to work hard, but there is a point where there is not only diminishing returns, there's actually negative returns. If we work harder, we get less result. And so, simple example, if you think about a salesperson who's really trying hard to make the sale because they're focused on the number, we've shown they will sell less than a person who is there to serve the customer, to be there to take care of someone. They will sell more by not trying to sell more. And I think this is, I see entrepreneurs, and I see consultants, and I see people in work, and they're busting their butts, and they never step back and they say, what am I really doing? Why am I doing it? I mean, we hear in companies the mantra, do more with less. Basically what that means is we're going to cut the budget, and we're going to give you twice as much work. That, to me, is a way of killing morale and killing organizations. I like to look at is, how do I do less and get more? How do I figure out what is the sweet spot of the right amount of work that unleashes the greatest amount of value? How do I move from a linear return on my investment to an exponential return on my investment? And so I think all of that is, related. The performance paradox relates to the imposter syndrome, because if we feel like an imposter, we're going to try really, really hard. I mean, a buddy of mine, I always thought he was the smartest guy I'd ever met in my life. And he just got degree after degree after degree. And I asked him, and I said to him one day, I said, you are probably the smartest person I know. And he had this really strange look on his face. He says, wow, that's not how I feel. The reason why I keep getting degrees is because I feel stupid. And we all have that version of it. And I think the more we try to convince the world we are something we don't believe ourselves to be, the harder it is, the lower returns, and it just leads to dissatisfaction.
I'm very interested in reading this book. When is it going to be released?
The bigger question is, when is it going to be written? So yes, I'm working on the book right now. It could be a long time before it's available, or it'll be quick. I don't really know yet. It depends on whether I go commercially published or self-published. If I commercially publish, it's certainly another year and a half away. If I self-publish it, I could have it out, early next year. So I haven't decided which path I'm going down.
I hope artists also happen to fall into part of the audience who'll be reading that book, because as an artist, I come from an artistic background. I'm an artist. My parents are as well. My mom in particular paints these very sophisticated, actually they're called meticulous paintings. And by definition, it takes a long time. But most critical part, as she indicates, is you have to know when to stop. And as an artist, in particular oil painters, all these meticulous strokes, it is really what differentiates basically a pretty good artist to an extraordinary one, is you have to know when you need to stop painting. And it's a really amazing concept, and I watched my mom in action, and somehow that theme just kind of echoes what you're describing here. And even with my podcast, there is that excitement to go through, this is going to be great. We're going to have a website, go through show notes, and 4 or 5 hours later, it's basically ready. But part of me is saying, no, it's not ready. This is not nearly good enough. I need to tweak the CSS and the visual design on the site. And really very quickly, when you're in the midst of all things, you lose track. And I think it's true with a lot of issues in life. And what are some of the what is a good question for that? How do you stop yourself? For instance, maybe before you write the book, what are the, one or two things that you find helpful in stopping yourself from doing that? And for instance, one of the things I did was Monday morning came and I was not happy with the podcast where it stood, and I said to myself, I'm just gonna go ahead and publish it anyway. What is the worst that could happen? And imagine a lot of really bad things in my head, but when I would start writing them down, they become very silly. And then of course that first blog post I posted 2 weeks ago got 76 unique shares on Facebook. It's great. But I find myself doing that all the time with little things in life. I would definitely have to read that book. What are the...
Well, I think part of it is maybe how I'm wired. I am not a detail-oriented person.
Good for you.
I don't get into the weeds. I have people who will prove pretty much everything I do because I don't trust myself to have that eye to know the details. Now, I know some people who are in the details to the point where they can't focus on what's important. So I always ask myself, what is it that I do better than anyone else, and what do I have to do? And I focus my energies there. And it's really amazing if you do that. I mean, I'm a big believer in partnerships and getting other people to work with me, and I've got some great people that I work with. So the reality is, if I'm not creating something new, I don't have to work pretty much at all. I mean, I have to prepare for my speech, and I've actually found ways of making that even faster, where the client, I give them some homework that they do, so I get back something very rich and very useful, but it doesn't take up a lot of my time. And so I can have a full, and because I've been doing my speeches for so long and the technology I use, I can very quickly customize things. So if I look at what I do, it's very, very little in the scheme of things. And I think part of it is I like time to reflect. I love sitting in hot tubs. I love going to the beach. I like walking beaches. And those to me are really important because they help me get clarity about what matters. If I'm working 100 hours a week, it's so difficult to have any sense of what matters. It's that space that I think is really important. So for me, I'm always just asking myself each day, what's the one thing I have to do today? That I have to do that no one else can do. That is really, really important. And I focus on that. And then everything else sort of gets done or doesn't get done. And I guess that's, the way I do it. And again, I look at everything from the perspective of experiments. We put a we created this mobile gaming app that I was telling you about, and I had my design for it. We designed it. It was built. Somebody else built it. They, so their sweat energy, building that thing. And now we're just doing some tests. We're just testing it out. Does it work? Doesn't it work? The risk on my part was minimal. It's been my time, but it wasn't even a massive amount of time. I basically just articulated what I wanted to be. Someone else took all the risk. And if it doesn't work, they're the ones who will lose out more than I will, because for me, it's just my time. And so that's what I'm always looking at as well. How do I partner with people, and how do I design my life in a way that I really figure out what I have to do? And look, for me, at the end of the day, it's my innovation content, and it is the way I deliver my innovation content. And those are the only two things that I do.
What was that one thing you had to do today?
The one thing I had to do today was I have some ideas for the new book that, obviously this was something I had to do today. It'd be hard to get somebody else to do this for me. But beyond this, the one thing that I had to do today, there's actually two things. One is I had a piece of the book that I wanted to write today. And so, but I knew this was going to take some research. So I actually have done some research, got what I needed, and I'm now starting to work on that one piece. And then the other one is we're working on a TV show, and I have a call with the producer and the production company. And beyond that, there's nothing that I have to do, and probably nothing that I will do today.
That's great. Knowing when to stop, when to start, when to stop. And do you wake up in the morning and have your spiritual intent set? For some people it's a form of meditation. I know many people don't, but how do you sort of reset yourself, or do you, every morning?
If I look at something I've been trying to do as a habit or discipline, it's been, whether it's truly meditation or not, it's just quiet time. Like quiet time where I, either put on some headphones and listen to some funky meditation music, or listen to some, some types of visualizations. Now picture this. And, that's what I'm trying to, but I'm still, even that, something which I think could only take 5 or 10 minutes, I'm not really good at even doing that as a habit. So I reset myself. I mean, part of my reset process is just having a deep, deep, deep appreciation for everything in my life. I think that might be one of the most important aspects is, to one's happiness, because I'm a big believer that expectation is the source of all disappointment and dissatisfaction. And it's not to say you don't want to have expectations, but if you swap expectations for appreciation, then you have a completely different outlook on your day and your life. And so that is one thing which I think I'm pretty good at, is like at down moments, I just think to myself, holy moly, how did I get all this? And I just feel blessed to have the life that I have. I think that's my main reset. And then there's little things that I do from time to time if I'm good about it.
I love that answer. I haven't disliked anything you said, and I don't mean in a sense. I feel like in closing, as a closure, that's something people remind themselves. Most of the people I know remind themselves, but to also hear from other people and to reassure that I think that's the right approach to life. All chaos aside, and I think that's when to set, I think, successful people apart from people who are always complaining and always seeking for something else that they don't have, and there's no end to that. So I really like that.
So the research I was doing today is some research, and one of the things which some people believe, some people don't believe, is that there is people with more money are happier. So I'll ask you, do you think people with more money are happier?
Oh, definitely not.
Definitely not. Okay.
No, definitely not.
Well, interestingly, the science proves that people with more money are happier.
But then there's a diminishing return.
No, it's actually what it is. But this comes back to something I said before, which is causation versus correlation. People, and I stated it in a very specific way, people with more money are happier. That doesn't mean money was the cause of happiness. The research that I was studying shows that, and I've read this research before, I was just sort of reacquainting myself with, is that actually happiness causes wealth. Your outlook and attitude towards life, how you see the world, will create opportunities for you.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you are, and it doesn't mean there aren't exceptions to every rule, there's an exception, but what I really believe is that part of the reason why I've been so successful is because I've been fortunate to have the family that I have, which has been supportive and loving and caring, that I've had the opportunities that I've had. I could go to a great university, started off right out of college with an incredible career at Accenture. And I think I've always maintained a really positive yet realistic outlook on life. I'm very grateful. And so I think people, what happens is if you're somebody who people like to be around because you have a great vision or you're exciting or you're optimistic, people want to be around that. And when people want to be around that, people want to work with you. And people want to partner with you. People want to learn from you. People want to help you. And that to me is what I find really fascinating, is the keys to success are often not just hard work. Part of it, it's mastery and performance. Mastery is being good at what you do. The performance is how you appear to the outside world. And I think the way you appear to the outside world is also how you appear to yourself in your inside world. And so, sort of a long-winded way of saying that, I'm a big believer that our outlook on life, the people we hang out with, and our belief structures are what give us, and this is not the law of attraction and the secret and all that, but this is really very much about we do cause what happens. And, happiness can cause...
We have control over certain things.
We have more control than we think. And if we believe we're victims and we believe the world's out to get us and we're closed vest and we don't want to share anything with people and we don't want to let people in on our secrets and, we push people away, well, people aren't that interested in seeing us be successful. Whereas if you're doing something cool, and this is where I also think creativity comes into play, is people also like to do something that no one else is doing. They want to be part of something new. There's something, it's risky, so they don't want to do it on their own. Because that's not the way we're wired as human beings. But if someone else is doing it, they can be part of something where the risk to them is small, but it appears that the creative reward is huge, people get very excited about that. And so that's why I think creativity, not for the solution, but for the ability to engage people, is so valuable.
I feel like I need to steal some lines from my podcast. And one of the things I realized, for me to take on a project completely on my own, or even just with one other person, like my mom's creating really interesting artworks, somehow it took me a long time. I was very hesitating. And to your point, it felt risk-taking. Whereas it's so much easier to talk to other people from different backgrounds, different industries. We've all walked through, different paths of life, and it's so fascinating, and it makes this project so much more natural and easier. If nothing else, it's so much easier to talk about other people than to actually talk about myself.
Yes.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and I realize that I've taken up all the time you have this afternoon.
Oh, I'm good.
I'm good, but I want to make sure that the audience. At this point, I think the decision is very clear. You're very searchable on Google, but I wonder if you could curate a path if people want to start learning more about you, whether your books, your blogs, what should they do next?
I would say, obviously, a website's a good place to go. So Stephen with a PH, StephenShapiro.com, so StephenShapiro.com. Go to the website. That will, at least if you go to the blog, I have 700 or 800 articles there that I've written over the years. I've been blogging for 10 years now. Even some of my videos, if you go to the website, there's some videos that are out there where you can very quickly learn, some of my beliefs, like you mentioned the TEDx NASA video. It's 6 minutes long. It's an entire speech in 6 minutes. So you can get a sense of at least one slice of my innovation philosophy. As far as books go, I would say depending on who you are and what you want, Best Practices Are Stupid, which is my latest book, is really for the corporate innovator. So if you're in a company and you want to innovate, that's great. But my two favorite books are actually Personality Poker and Goal-Free Living, because they talk to the individual as well as larger organizations. And I think Goal for Living is actually my favorite because I just believe that we have an opportunity to live a life differently than society says we're supposed to.
I love that.
And that's what I like.
Yeah, that's one book, to be honest, I will need to get to, and that I feel very motivated after this conversation. Growing up in China, in a very traditional culture, we're really very conditioned and trained and educated in every way to, school in particular, go to school at a certain time. Even, I remember meeting someone in my grade who's a year older or a year younger. that is introduced so much like detriments to them, and then you start picking on them and all that. And all of a sudden, after graduating from college, a certain job you need to have, how much you're supposed to make, getting married, have kids, and all that, I feel like really wears on people.
Yeah.
I think it really, to a certain degree, blocks people. Like, for instance, I know I want to have kids, but I really want to kind of just harness the next couple of years to do something like this. And I made a decision that I want to choose myself, and I think that's part of the goal-free living theme as well. And I choose myself, and I choose to work on this project. And
I love that.
Yeah.
Well said.
Thank you. So thank you so much. I had so much fun.
Great time.
To listen to more episodes of the Feisworld podcast, please subscribe on iTunes or visit feisworld.com. That is FEISWORLD, where you can find show notes, links, other tools, and resources. You can also follow me on Twitter at Feisworld. Until next time, thanks for listening.